perhaps how we do business here in the UK isn't as familiar to everybody. So I thought I'd start with some basic building blocks around the GMC, who we are and what we do. So the GMC, General Medical Council, traditionally the professional regulatory body for doctors only in the UK. We've been around these parts since since exactly 1858, so we're probably one of the oldest professional regulatory bodies in the world, and we were established way back in the middle of the 19th century in order to ensure that patients and others could identify the difference between somebody who was actually a qualified doctor and those who were perhaps charlatans at the time. And that was the reason that we were established. We're now quite a large organisation. There's about 1,700 people working in the GMC. The one thing I should say, which will be very familiar to UK colleagues but less so to others, is that we're a UK-wide regulator. I think that's important in this context. So we regulate doctors who work in England, Wales, in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The GMC has offices in England, in London and Manchester. We also have offices in Cardiff and Wales, in Edinburgh in Scotland and in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And the reason I'm labouring the point is that Professor Laing's review is an England-only review. It was commissioned by the Department of Health in England. There are Department of Health in Departments of Health in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland too, and I think that's very important in terms of how the recommendations are going to be taken forward. In my own directorate there's about 440 people now, so it's quite a significant operation at the GMC, and we also contract with a range of other people to provide services for us, people who assess doctors who are coming to work overseas, people who do quality assurance of our education, medical schools, PA schools. There's about 3,000 of them all told, so it's a fairly significant operation here in the UK. And the thing I'm going to talk about specifically today is about PAs and AAs, but focusing on PAs specifically, and really the journey of PAs from their inception in the NHS over 20 years ago to becoming a regulated profession today. And it's been a long, and for a lot of PAs and AAs, quite an arduous journey to get us to where we are. Just in terms of what do professional regulators do, many of you will be very familiar with what professional regulators do in your country, but I guess there's a number of kind of key limbs of things that we do. And again, I should have said in terms of the titles, I'm going to talk today about physician associates. I'll probably shorten that to PAs. I know that the Laing Review has recommended a change in title, but at the moment, the GMC is governed by legislation agreed by the UK Parliament, and the title in legislation is Physician Associate, and we are currently registering and regulating physician associates. That's the legal position as it currently stands. That may change in the future, but that's where we are currently. So that's why I'm referring to physician associates and anaesthesia associates. So just in terms of the four limbs of what we do. Firstly, and this applies to doctors, PAs and AAs, we register doctors, PAs and AAs. At the moment, no doctor can work in any capacity in the UK unless they're registered and licensed by the GMC. That's not true yet of PAs, but we're actively encouraging PAs to register with us. I think it's really important. It's a real signifier of professional status. It means that we have verified and assessed an individual's qualification. It means that that PA has undertaken a two-part PA, it used to be called the PA National Exam. It's now called, or will be called from next month, the PA Registration Assessment. It means we've done a range of checking with our employers. It means that we're satisfied, there's no outstanding concerns. So I think it's really important to be a regulated professional. And so registering with the GMC, I'll come on to the numbers in a moment, is clearly something that's been really important to PAs, and they've come and registered with us in their droves since we started regulating in December. The other thing that we do is that we set standards for doctors, PAs and AAs now, and the high-level document that we set that covers both doctors, PAs and AAs is called Good Medical Practice. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with good medical practice. It's been around in various forms since probably about the mid-1990s. And in many ways, it's acted as the standard format for standards and ethics for all healthcare professionals in many countries around the globe. The reason I want to labour this point again a little bit is, given all the controversy around PAs, we're getting a lot of queries from PAs about, do I still need to follow good medical practice as a registered GMC professional, even if I'm now in a role called physician assistant? Answer, yes. But I also want to provide some reassurance. I think there's maybe some misunderstanding about what good medical practice is. It's the highest of high-level descriptions of the standards and ethics that we would expect every registered professional to follow. So I'm not entirely sure which aspects of good medical practice one might not follow, even if one was not registered with the GMC. So to give you some examples, we talk about trust and professionalism. You must act with honesty and integrity and be open if things go wrong. We talk about never unfairly discriminating against patients or colleagues. We talk about working with colleagues in ways that best serve the interests of patients. We talk about listening to patients and working in partnership with them. We talk about keeping your knowledge and skills up to date. So I think for any healthcare professional registered with the GMC or not, it's quite difficult to argue that those are principles that shouldn't apply to everybody who treats patients. I mean, the reality is that patients being the first concern of all healthcare professionals has to be at the root of what everybody wants to do in healthcare. The third thing we do with physician associates, and indeed with doctors, is that we regulate their education and training. So it's the GMC that will approve the curriculum for PAs and AAs, and it's the GMC that will approve PA courses, and indeed AA courses. And again, I think that's an important point, because for the first time since regulation began, PAs will have their courses regulated in exactly the same way as doctors here in the UK. They'll have their curriculum agreed at a national level by the GMC. And so it's really important now, I think, that there's a level of consistency right across the piece in terms of the education and training of PAs. And that's a really, I think, really important step forward. In fact, we'd agreed a draft curriculum about 2 years ago. Phil will be very familiar with this. The current curriculum is held by the PA Schools Council here. And the curriculum, as it currently stands, is already embedded in PA courses right across the UK. And finally, I guess the thing that we're probably best known for in relation to doctors in the UK, you can't really open a national newspaper on any day without finding some story covering some concerns or issues about doctors. And of course, if we hold a register, we also need to determine whether or not any individual continues to meet the standards that we set, and if there are significant breaches of those standards, then we can take action to suspend, to apply conditions to an individual's registration, or ultimately to erase an individual PA, AA, or doctor, usually called striking off in the UK. So that's a kind of a feel for our role and what it is we do. I have to say the road to regulation has been a slightly long and arduous one. As I said, PAs have existed in the NHS, I think probably since about 2002, 2003. I think the starting point was probably physician assistants who came over from the US, many of whom helped establish PA courses here in the UK. But the numbers have increased probably fairly significantly in recent years, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So for a really lengthy period of time, PAs and AAs have not been regulated, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they probably ended up being one of the few, if only, healthcare professionals treating patients in the UK without being regulated. I was mentioning to Andy a moment ago, we have art therapists regulated in the UK, and yet we did not have PAs regulated in the UK. That had nothing to do with PAs. PAs have been lobbying for years to be regulated for a variety of reasons. It either wasn't a priority with the department in England because it needs legislation to give any individual body the right to regulate. So eventually the Department of Social Health and the Department of Health and Social Care decided that PAs and AAs should be regulated, and they asked the GMC to take on that regulation. I think probably for two reasons. There was a sense that PAs worked the medical model, and therefore them being regulated by the GMC was probably a good thing, that they work very closely with doctors and are supervised by doctors. So again, the link to the GMC seemed particularly sensible. And I think finally, there's a kind of GMC status piece, I think. I think doctors might tell you differently, but most stakeholders in the UK would say that the GMC is a good and effective regulator, and I think there was a certain trust in us to do the job appropriately. So we were funded by the Department of Health and Social Care to take forward the regulation of PAs and AAs. A number of bumps along the road, not least the pandemic, but we eventually got to a point where, see where it says AAPAO, that stands for Anesthesia Associate and Physician Associate Order. So it's an order, it's a piece of legislation that passed through Parliament. And eventually we began regulating PAs and AAs in December last year, where the kind of blue dot is it kind of blue, purple dot is in the centre? That's where we are currently. The registers are open, we've begun approving courses and curricula, and we've begun developing the remaining elements of regulation. Again, important to say that PAs and AAs are not required by law to register with us at the moment. They may be required by their employers to register with us, but they're not required by law to register with us. We're in what's called a transition phase, but by December 2026, anybody who wants to work as a PA or an AA in the UK, exactly the same as it is for doctors, they will need to be registered with the GMC. So where are we now? Actually, I just looked again this morning. So I've said here that we've got over 3,300 PAs registered. We actually now have over 3,500 PAs registered, I'm sure some of whom are in this room, I think, probably. And that's actually a fantastic result, because before the introduction of regulation, the Faculty of PAs, which was housed by the Royal College of Physicians, maintained a voluntary register. And at the start of regulation, there was about 5,000 PAs who were on the voluntary register. So 6-7 months into regulation by the GMC, the vast majority of those PAs have actually registered with us. And I think that's a really good thing. I think it's good for them, it's good for their status. And it's probably going to become, in the very near future, something that employers will require. We have approved, I think, something in the region of 32 or 33 PA courses. So we're happy with those courses, we're happy with the outcomes, and we're happy that the qualifications that they award are going to be acceptable for our purposes and allow PAs to sit our two-part assessment. And currently we're going through the draft curricula for both AAs and PAs, because it's the GMC that needs to approve those curricula. I think a lot of the GMC's role has been forgotten in a lot of the debates thus far. It's not that we haven't tried to influence, but I think that's really important, that any changes to the draft curricula have to come through the GMC, they have to be evidence-based, and we have to ensure that any changes to the curricula are supported by evidence and have been appropriately consulted on. So that's where we are at the moment. I probably don't have to say too much about this to this particular audience. As I've said, PAs have been lobbying for regulation for a significantly long period of time. And I think probably for all of these reasons, there is definitely something important about being a regulated professional,